All right, Oliver, in this second episode, we're going to be building our moon station, but we're going to be building it in sections so that we don't have to build or create some giant, enormous, ridiculous rocket that is very hard to fly in game and is also not practical for the real world. So I'm going to use the cupola as the top, and I'm going to use a fairing to create a sort of hypothetical living space of the space station, and we're going to use the large docking ports, as you'll see in a little bit, to connect up the sections of the space station. So this will be the observation deck and the control center, and then we're going to add a science lab to it. I'm going to add some nuclear power to it. I always kind of like to do that because sometimes the solar panels get damaged or you forget to open them in time and you run out of power in the middle of your mission and you have to start over. I'm just going to attach we're just going to double check our rigid attachment. When you add these bigger docking ports, you want to turn the first one upside down. You see where the black and yellow stripe is? Those are the two sides that go together. If you put it on backwards, you won't be able to dock once you're in space. So the second section of this is going to be the second stage to help us get to orbit. And as you can see, I'm going to add a control module to it so that we can undock it and deorbit it. We don't want to leave any space debris up there for future collisions, and we always want to avoid the Kepler effect if possible, even if it costs a little bit extra money. So now I'm building the first stage, which will have to be the largest stage, as it is going to have to do most of the heavy lifting. We can see here that our mass is going to be about 9.9 tons. So that's our payload. I'm not going to put a fairing on this, so it is kind of, the cupola is kind of a blunt front of the spacecraft, so it will create a little bit more drag. But we'll get up to orbit nonetheless, and we don't have to build a huge rocket to begin with. You can see that our second stage has 1160 meters per second of delta V. So I'm going to actually decrease the first stage a little bit, the size of it. We don't need as much. To get to orbit, you need about a combined total of 3,300 meters a second to safely get to orbit. And when you add up 2470 and 1160, you are definitely a few hundred meters of delta V, meters per second of delta V, more than you need to get to orbit. So since our goal is just to get to orbit, and then the next episode will be the second module, or the habitation module, that we will then dock with this, and then the third stage will be our power stage to get us out to lunar orbit with all of our Kerbal astronauts. So here we are launching. We're going to use the efficient way to get to orbit, where we're going to deviate from the most efficient way to sort of getting a little bit higher out in the atmosphere before we develop too much speed, so that we can negate the effects of drag created by the bluntness of our spacecraft here. So like always, we're going to use the D key to pitch over to the right and begin our gravity turn, and we're going to initially fly so that every 10 degrees we pitch over in our gravity turn, we're going another 100 meters per second in the game here. And you can see, you can just, once you set your rocket to the prograde, to hold the prograde heading, all you need to do is adjust your throttle setting to control the gravity turn and velocity, so that you can maximize your fuel to orbit and your payload to orbit weight. But as we get up here to this section, I'm going to add a little bit of throttle so that we can get a little bit higher in the atmosphere before we start going too quickly, like I said, because of the bluntness of the rocket without the fairing on top. And you can see that we're still running into a good amount of atmospheric drag. One of the great things about KSP is that all the ash and carbon and soot buildup on the windows of the cupola observation tower for the space station won't exist, even though we're probably building up some residue on the outside of the window. And you can see as we get up higher, the atmosphere becomes less and less of a concern. And what I'm doing here is actually, I'm not jettisoning the first stage because it's got the fins on it, so it's going to help keep us oriented the proper way so we don't start tumbling. And then as we jettison that and add power, we're up and out of the thickest parts of the atmosphere, so now we're not going to see as much drag at all. And now really we're just going to keep burning until we get our apoapsis up and out of the atmosphere. I believe we're going to go up to about 130 kilometers here to set our orbit. So since we're going to be docking our second and third stage of the space station, we want to take the orbit up a little bit higher so that it makes it easier to fly the second and third stages up and rendezvous. You've got some playroom between the beginning of space at 70 kilometers and the initial orbit at 130 kilometers, so you can maneuver around in space to get a rendezvous a little bit easier. And as always, we just fly up to our apoapsis, or just short of it, and we orient prograde and conduct a burn to bring our periapsis up and out of the Earth's atmosphere to achieve a relatively circularized, stable orbit in the vacuum of space. Never has to be perfect, but I do like to tweak it a little bit. You can see here that we're about 132 kilometers at our highest and 130 kilometers at our lowest. And we've got a nice inclination that's equal to the moon, so that once we do our transfer burn, we won't have a wonky inclination around the moon. And so we undock our second stage rocket engine, and we're going to kind of move it out of the way of the space station and conduct a retro burn to deorbit it so that we can always maintain zero space garbage. I like to think that all of our space debris deorbits around China because they tend to be messy with their space debris and don't care about the rest of the world. So this is our retaliation against the evil forces of communism. And voila, the command center of our lunar space station is now in orbit. And we are going to continue on with the habitation module, or the second stage of the lunar space station, in episode 3. So I'll see you there, buddy.